Well, the message from Ben Bernanke today is that the Fed's highly accommodative monetary policy likely to continue for the foreseeable future, but at the same time he's reiterating that the Fed could start to taper those bond buys later on this year, end them altogether by the middle of next year. The same message he delivered at his last press conference as well, but he is stressing in his testimony that that outlook all depends on the economy. Here's the key section. I emphasize that because our asset purchases depend on economic and financial developments, they are by no means on a preset course. On the one hand, if economic conditions were to improve faster than expected and inflation appeared to be rising decisively back toward our objective, the pace of asset purchases could be reduced somewhat more quickly. On the other hand, if the outlook for employment were to become relatively less favorable, if inflation did not appear to be moving back towards 2%, or if financial conditions, which have tightened recently, were judged to be insufficiently accommodative to allow us to attain our mandated objectives, the current pace of purchases could be maintained for longer. Bernanke also commits that after those purchases end, that the Fed will continue to keep its holdings of treasuries or mortgage-backed securities on its books and reinvest the proceeds, keeping downward pressure on rates. He signaled that before, but it sounds like the language here is even stronger. And he also stresses again that tapering is not tightening. He says it is more like the Fed taking its foot off the gas pedal, if you will. For example, if unemployment hits 6.5%, that doesn't necessarily mean rates will start to rise automatically. Another key section, if a substantial part of the reductions in measured unemployment were judged to reflect cyclical declines in labor force participation rather than gains in employment, the committee would be unlikely to view a decline in employment to 6.5% as a sufficient reason to raise its target for the federal funds rate. Likewise, the committee would be unlikely to raise the funds rate if inflation remained persistently below our longer run objective. And Bernanke again stresses that there are several wild cards out there for the economy, most specifically fiscal policy. He mentioned specifically the concerns about the debt ceiling fight to come later in the year, and he says the economy remains vulnerable to unanticipated shocks. And on the economy overall, Bernanke says the economic recovery has continued at a moderate pace in recent quarters despite the strong headwinds created by federal fiscal policy. Conditions in the labor market are improving gradually, but he stresses unemployment is still too high, still has concerns about the labor market out there. He does specifically cite the improvement in housing as being a big boost to the U.S. economy, and he ends, Betty, with a pretty lengthy discussion about the Fed's regulatory moves, specifically those moves to raise bank capital standards and leverage ratios. And he talks again about the Fed's effort to try and implement Dodd-Frank. So a lengthy discussion on regulatory policy ends his testimony today.